have interacted and have developed a habit of cooperation. But I must underscore that one of the most important features of the region's architecture for many, many years now has been, without doubt, the workings of ASEAN-ISIS. I can recount many initiatives in our region to do with the Asia-Pacific region, whose genesis, whose embryonic discussions emanated from forums such as today's, the ASEAN-ISIS forum. And I'd like to pay tribute to ASEAN-ISIS for making possible such a very interactive and a very robust forum for comparing of notes on matters of common concern. If I may abuse the forum, not to speak in a very formal, in a way even overly prepared text, because I'd like to think out loud and I'd like to benefit from the presence of so many of you who are far more informed than myself on regional issues, and to try to provoke some ideas and to provoke some response upon which I will definitely benefit. And that is the kind of mindset that I am approaching our interaction this afternoon. The chair has been very kind in describing Indonesia's rise, and we are grateful for that, but at the same time we are only too conscious of the great challenges that we still face in terms of our national efforts, in terms of our national economic development efforts, in terms of strengthening our democracy as well. But what I can assure everyone in this room is that irrespective, Indonesia will always present itself as a responsible, as a constructive, as a problem-solving member of the community here in the Asia-Pacific. And it is in this light, that I wish to share some thoughts at this stage on one specific theme, if that is the right term, in terms of what are, from our perspective, the main challenges being faced by our region today, and what could be the response that we can try to offer in this regard. I have spoken of this a little while back when I was in Washington and spoke before the CSIS forum on Indonesia conference, but I'd like to represent and present the case once again in the hope that I can solicit some response and some suggestions from all of you. In our view, in Indonesia's view, in my view at least, we face at least three types of challenges in our part of the world. I am deliberately vague in terms of what do I mean by our part of the world. It can be Southeast Asia, it can be East Asia, it can be Asia Pacific, it can even be what I use the term Indo-Pacific. But whatever the geographical context, I feel that there are at least three kinds of challenges that we are facing just now. One, very basic, and in a way quite unfortunate as well, that we should still be dealing with this type of situation, namely the issue of trust deficit, or lack of trust, or room for improvement or enhancement in our trust relations between countries in the region. I know that for many decades now we've had proliferations of forums, including the ASEAN Regional Forum, where the issue of confidence building and conflict prevention has been very much part and parcel of the activities. And we know as well how countries' economies in our region have become even more interdependent in recent years. But that notwithstanding, I am seeing increasingly relations among countries in this part of the world affected by such a trust deficit. And this must be addressed in a direct manner. Obviously, the most acute form of such lack of trust or trust deficit is when we look at situations on the Korean Peninsula. How developments there, a perennial issue, perennial problem, have ever become more magnified in terms of the nature and challenge. And whenever we are entrapped in a cycle of tensions and distrust. We have almost like a sense of irreversibility towards conflict. And this, I believe, we countries in the region must have the courage to disrupt. There is nothing inevitable about having like a cycle of action, reaction, ever-spiraling sense of crisis, which can, in a self-fulfilling manner, as a result of individual national decision-making, leads us to a situation where we do not wish to be. So I believe in our part of the world, we must place even greater effort in coming forward with modalities, in confronting in a more direct, robust manner situation of this lack of trust or trust deficit. The second challenge that I'd like to offer is one that is pretty obvious, but need to be said nonetheless, the issue of territorial disputes. Whether it be South China Sea, East China Sea, India, China, and many other permutations, the continued prevalence of territorial disputes, unless managed, can become a real source of tensions and even a crisis and even conflict. These territorial disputes have been with us for many decades, but it is only recently that they have come to the fore in even more acute manner. We have to ask ourselves, why now? Why such renewal, assertiveness on the part of countries in dealing what in the past had been an obviously pending issue, dormant, but now suddenly is back at the forefront of regional issues. By definition, territorial issues cannot be resolved overnight. They will require many, many years, decades even, of painstaking, patient negotiations. But pending that, we must learn to live with this reality. And what I would like to suggest is that when it is patently obvious that there is a territorial dispute, without prejudice to our respective national principal position, let's accept that as being a fact of life and then behave accordingly. We have to have a code of conduct. I'm not speaking here only of the South China Sea code of conduct, but a general code of conduct on how, having recognized that there is some kind of territorial dispute, how can we stop irresponsible testing, prodding? Let's see what the reaction will be if we fly the flag in this and that direction. Extremely dangerous. Ripe for crisis, ripe for miscalculation, misperception, a crisis, a conflict simply awaiting to happen. So I would like to suggest on this score, on the issue of territorial disputes, we must have a smarter way of managing it. It has worked in the past, somehow we have been able to push everything under the carpet perhaps, but now I sense the genie is out of the bottle. There is a sense of wanting to preempt, wanting not to be behind, and we see a proliferation of threat and danger. Disputes, territorial disputes even, do not have to become a conflict. And I think all of us in this part of the world, when all is said and done, must believe that it is in our collective interest to manage these issues, to create climate conducive for the conflict to be resolved in a peaceful manner. The third point, the third challenge is the challenge of managing change. This is the point that I wish to, the third challenge that I wish to identify. Basically, our region is one of constant change. We are seeing countries rising in terms of prominence. You have been kind enough just now to refer in this instance to Indonesia, but I can say the same to practically all of us in this room. China, obviously, India, ASEAN, collectively, ASEAN, individually. All of us are constantly changing, whether it be internally, in terms of political system, economically, most definitely. But how do we address and manage this constant change? I believe that we have to have a new perspective, a new ways of looking at things. Gone are the days when we can simply say we must engineer some kind of a perfect balance that we simply locked in and not touch and simply make sure that this remains the case. I believe gone are the days when we are seeking security, even prosperity at the expense of the other. We must, in my view, develop a new perspective where we do away with the Cold War type of fault lines, an us and a them. If one is rising, one must be falling. I think there is enough space in our region to believe and to nurture the sense of what is good for one country can be made good for the other as well. I am of the view, as I have said on several occasions, that we should promote what we call a dynamic equilibrium for our region. A dynamic in the sense that it is inbuilt in our region that things are constantly changing. China is rising, others are rising. It's a fact of life. It's a constant. Let's not rebel against it. Let's not deny it. Let's take it as a given and live with it and manage it. But at the same time, it must be a dynamism, a change that must have some degree of order. We do not wish to see the predictability of a one preponderant state of affairs, a preponderant power of whatever persuasion, whatever color, whatever composition, having its ways. That's bad for our region. At the same time, we wish not to see an anarchical situation of where countries are in constant state of flux without some kind of order, some kind of predictability of behavior. So we must have norms and principles to govern our relations based on the notion of common security, common prosperity, and common stability. That prosperity, security, and stability is a common good that cannot simply be asserted and proclaimed and obtained at the expense of the other. In my view, given the three types of challenges I have tried to identify, the lack of trust, trust deficit, the issue of territorial disputes, the issue of managing change, the time may come, if not for governments, at least for the track 2 type of community, but I'd like to suggest even for governments, to begin to think of having some kind of a region-wide Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific treaty of friendship and cooperation. We in ASEAN have had the TAC, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, which have been quite useful in terms of nurturing a sense of community, establishing a sense that conflict would be unthinkable amongst us. We have been fortunate in having countries beyond ASEAN now increasingly acceding to the TAC, underwriting the TAC. But I have begun to think that those countries that needs a TAC is no longer now among ASEAN countries. I am thinking of relations such as United States and China. I am thinking of relations such as Japan and China, India and China, Japan and the ROK. A number of very profound and important bilaterals whose nature, whether they are partnership or competition or even conflict will determine the sense or the situation in our region. I am thinking of developing a TAC for our region in a step-by-step approach. Nothing grand, not one instant, one moment, everyone on board, but it's out there. Free, available for countries who wish to exceed when they feel the comfort level to exceed. We have the embryo for such an effort. In Bali in 2011 at the East Asia Summit, the leaders of East Asia countries adopted what's called the Bali Principles, which purposefully is akin to the TAC and building upon several other principles within our region, but this time governing the East Asia Summit participants. Indonesia is working on translating that political document into a legally binding document. I believe, colleagues and friends, Your Highness, the time is ripe for us to think bold, to think big. 2015 ASEAN community is but only 2 years ahead of us. Fortunately, in ASEAN, we are already thinking post-2015. In 2011, we adopted the Bali Concord III, which is the ASEAN community in a global community of nations. That's a nice, seamless way of propelling ASEAN to the global level. But I think the time is ripe as well for us to be thinking beyond ASEAN, to extrapolate ASEAN's experience that had transformed the hitherto Cold War divisions. Open conflict among ASEAN countries has now become what it has become. In my view, it is not impossible to do the same with patience, with sense of purpose, but we have to have a plan. We have to start somewhere. And I'd like to think that this is as good a moment to start as any. I just wish to have two more footnote message. When I raised this idea, a lot of interest was generated. Unfortunately, one of the first questions that is often asked is, to whom is it directed against? This is the problem. We have been so captured by this us and them. There must be a hidden agenda here. Is it to contain country A, to contain country B? That is why that paradigm shift that I speak of, a common security, common prosperity, common stability becomes ever more important. It is premised on a new way of looking at our world, our part of the Pacific. So we can have an Asia Pacific that is truly Pacific, that is peaceful, that is stable, that is, after all, how we have all made the kind of progress that we have been making. One final note on my part, as I had begun, since the theme is related to Indonesia's development, I'm not using the word rise, evolution or development.